Good Shabbos. This week I'd like to discuss the role of a rabbi, and in particular, the question whether a rabbi should involve himself in political matters. And I'm not here discussing the legal implications, but rather the traditional role of a rabbi. And when you go back in history, the rabbi was never involved in pastoral duties, although today that's an essential part of the job description and an important part, and I think it has a great value. But otherwise, the rabbi was generally there for halachic discussions, halachic decisions. And he would be the one who would decide how we should go about whether something is kosher or not, questions about the mikveh, about the eruv, about the laws of Shabbos, rituals within the shul, the customs within the shul. That was the general role that a rabbi would play. And therefore, many people would say that he or she should therefore limit themselves to only discussions of halacha, pure halacha. But I think it's very important to understand that halacha is not really just ritual. Halacha is not just whether something is asur or mutter, whether it's forbidden or it's allowed, whether you should do a certain ritual at a certain time or not. But rather, halacha has much more attached to it. It's not just the surface. It's not just how to act. It's also why to act, and what's the goal, and what's the purpose. What is the raison d'etre of all of these mitzvahs in the Torah, and what is really the guiding principle. And when we look at this week's portion of Kisei, we have many different laws, but a lot of the laws, as it is throughout the Torah, are talk about how you're supposed to treat someone, how you're supposed to treat someone in business. Should you help your friend who's in trouble? How should you treat somebody who's a stranger, an orphan? Constantly dealing with moral and ethical issues. And again, you could limit it and say, well, now that the Torah gave us this law, we have to know whether this is permitted or forbidden, whether it's suggested behavior or not, how much charity I'm obligated to give, and where should I give my charity. And that's just a question of what it says in the Shulchan Aruch and the Code of Jewish Law. But it's, I think, obvious that the Code of Jewish Law, as I just said, it relates to how to act as a human being. And therefore, morality and ethics are an important part of what a rabbi is supposed to do. He's supposed to be someone who leads a congregation or a community in areas of how to act and what kind of personality we should have, what kind of character traits we should try to inculcate within ourselves. And therefore, when we come to politics, the question is, okay, politics is somebody else's role in community, and we should involve ourselves in something outside of our limited community. But I think that's really not looking at the whole picture. And we see that especially true today. Because if you look at politics today, the problem that we have is that the politician is not there just to decide what is the best path to take for economic development. It's not just a question of should we have more conservative values as far as understanding the role of government in personal life, or should we be more liberal? Those are questions which are very important and actually affect the way we live our life. But a rabbi doesn't have expertise in that. He might have a degree in economics, but simply the rabbi's expertise should be in the area of halacha. But again, the area of halacha is also the area of morality and ethics. And when there's certain political issues which affect our morality, which reflect on how we treat people and how we act, and then in particular, if you have a leader or a politician who is very immoral or very moral, then those politicians, those leaders affect the community, affect us as individuals. If I have someone that I look up to as an authority figure who's leading us, then I'm going to be influenced by their character. And who, as a community, as a city, or even a country, we promote or we elect shows what it reflects on the morality and the ethics of that particular community. So it has an effect on us, on what life is all about. And therefore, whether we treat someone with respect or treat someone with dignity is all an outcome of sometimes is an outcome of our politics and our political leaders. And therefore, although rabbis historically didn't talk about politics, that's because they're not expert in politics. And that's not their area that they're, in a sense, quote unquote, hired to do. But they are hired, and they do have a responsibility and obligation to make sure that people understand what is correct and what is not. You might disagree, but that's the obligation. The obligation is to promote ethical and moral behavior. And sometimes I think it's therefore necessary to stand up, and even though it might not be something that everyone will agree with, that it might be contentious and it might create divisions, you sometimes have to take a stand. Now, if it creates divisions to the point where you lose your effectiveness, then that's a balancing act that we all always have to sort of ride. We have to try to sort of understand the tension and the balance that has to exist between saying what we believe is true and making sure that people have perhaps might listen or might learn from us, or might get so disgusted with the position that you're taking that you no longer have any effectiveness as a leader. So that's something which we always have to understand, we always have to discuss, and we always have to debate. But underlying it all, I personally believe that it's a responsibility to stand up for morality. So if you have a leader who is acting totally immoral, and that immorality is not just something which is an example for the community, but because people will now stand behind a certain political leader, they will rationalize the immoral behavior. When you start rationalizing immoral behavior in someone else, it's not going to be so long between you rationalizing moral behavior within your own community, within your own family, within yourself. Because if you could rationalize what so-and-so is doing, then we're going to rationalize what we're doing. Now, it's possible that there's sometimes a decision has to be made. Yes, somebody is a mayor, a premier who acts immorally, but that's not what his job is all about. There's a compartmentalization. His private life is not his public life. Sometimes that's the case. Sometimes there are areas of concern of a community which will override the immoral behavior of a leader. But when the line is crossed, when the immoral behavior becomes part of how we view that person, that leader, and we start rationalizing that behavior in order to support that leader, that starts really having a very negative effect on ourselves. And at that point, I believe that you have to stand up for some principles. It's hard to say things that people will not agree with, and perhaps taking a chance of losing someone's respect of one of the congregants or somebody in the community. But that's always a question that we have to look at and make sure we understand fully, and before we sort of delve into the political arena. And again, it shouldn't be just politics, it should be morality. And therefore I say, there are times when we have to stand up for what's right and what's wrong. And hopefully that's something which will translate into making us better people. And also, it might help if we realize that we're allowed to have open debate about certain issues. We don't have to take positions where it's either black and white, that if you hold one position, I can't talk to you anymore. I don't think that's true. I think if there's an honest debate about what is right and what is wrong, we could go at it very vehemently, but at the end come out as friends. As I've quoted other times, there's a Gemara, a section of the Talmud that says that when two people go into a beis medrash, into a study hall, and they debate the issues in the Talmud or in Jewish law, it says, "Mitchila nasu sonim zel zeh." In the beginning, there are enemies with each other. But it was sof nasu oavim zelazeh. The end, they become lovers, they become friends, because you're fighting about a principle. And if I see somebody else really is passionate about a principle, that means I hopefully will respect their search for truth, if it really is a search for truth. But it doesn't mean my position has to be weakened. It doesn't mean I have to hold back from saying what I think is correct or not correct. And hopefully we can go through, we're now in the month of Elul, before Rosh Hashanah, and we really have to search our own lives and our own opinions and who we respect, and make sure that those people that we respect for the right reasons. Good Shabbos.